My heart raced as I watched my husband gracefully dodge the vase I deliberately left in his path. Adrian Kane, my supposedly blind husband of 2 weeks, moved with the fluid precision of someone who could see perfectly well. I had spent the last 14 days testing him, leaving objects scattered around our mansion, watching him navigate them without a single mishap. The wealthy heir who claimed to have lost his sight in a car accident 5 years ago was lying to me. Yesterday changed everything. I was dancing in our bedroom, completely naked, feeling a rare moment of freedom in this arranged marriage prison. Then I saw it in the mirror, his eyes following my every movement, drinking in my bare skin with an intensity that made my blood run cold. The worst part? Something in those hungry eyes seemed familiar, stirring memories from my high school days that I couldn't quite grasp. I need to escape this web of lies he has woven around me. But each time I think about running, he seems to know exactly what I'm planning. He anticipates my every move, as if he's been studying me for years. The question burning in my mind isn't just why he's pretending to be blind, but why he chose me specifically for this arranged marriage. I'm Maya Chen, and I'm trapped in a marriage built on the biggest deception I've ever encountered. This is my story of revenge, passion, and discovering the truth about the man who sees everything while pretending to see nothing. Before we start this video, buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. I stared at my reflection in the full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman before me in an elaborate white wedding dress. The silk and lace felt like chains against my skin, each crystal embellishment another shackle binding me to a future I never wanted. In less than 2 hours, I would become Mrs. Adrian Kane, wife to a man I barely knew and definitely did not love. My paintbrush moved furiously across the canvas in my studio, splashing angry reds and blacks in violent strokes. This would be my last painting here in my sanctuary. After today, I would be moving into the Kane mansion with my new husband, leaving behind the only place I truly felt free. The memory of my parents dropping the bombshell 3 months ago still made my stomach churn. They had invited me to dinner, which should have been my first warning sign. My mother had prepared all my favorite dishes, another red flag I had foolishly ignored. "Maya, we have wonderful news," my father had said, beaming across the dinner table. "The Kane family has proposed a marriage between you and their son, Adrian." I had laughed, thinking it was a joke, but their serious expressions quickly sobered me. "This is the 21st century," I had protested. "People don't have arranged marriages anymore. The Kanes are one of the most prestigious families in the city," my mother had countered. "This union would secure your future, our future. Adrian is a good man. A good man I've never met," I had snapped back. My father's expression had hardened. "You'll meet him next week. The agreement is already in place." I added more black to my canvas, the paint dripping like tears down the surface. The first meeting with Adrian had been surreal. He was undeniably handsome, with sharp features and dark hair, but his unseeing eyes had unnerved me. They had told me about his accident 5 years ago, how he had lost his sight in a car crash, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of meeting him. He had been perfectly polite, perfectly proper, and perfectly distant. While our parents discussed wedding arrangements around us, he had sat there with an unreadable expression, his expensive sunglasses hiding whatever emotions might have flickered across his face. The following meetings had been equally stilted. Adrian was always accompanied by his personal assistant, a stern-faced woman named Margaret, who seemed to watch my every move. We never had a moment alone, never had a real conversation. How could I marry someone I couldn't even talk to? A knock at my studio door jolted me from my thoughts. "Maya, the makeup artist is here," my mother called out. I looked down at my paint-stained hands and the ruined manicure they had forced on me yesterday. Good. Let them see how unsuitable I was for their perfect society wedding. The next few hours passed in a blur of hairspray, makeup, and my mother's constant fussing. I sat numbly as they transformed me into their idea of a perfect bride, all while my mind raced with possibilities of escape. But where would I go? My parents had made it clear this marriage was happening, or I would lose everything, including my art studio. The church loomed before me, its Gothic architecture feeling more like a prison than a place of celebration. Through the stained glass windows, I could see the hundreds of guests filing in, business associates, society figures, all here to witness the merger of two prominent families disguised as a wedding. My father took my arm, squeezing it gently. "Maya, please try to smile. This is your wedding day." I wanted to scream that this was not my wedding day, this was a business transaction, but the words died in my throat as the wedding march began to play. Adrian stood at the altar, tall and imposing in his tailored tuxedo. His sunglasses were gone, replaced by striking blue eyes that stared straight ahead, unseeing, or so I thought. As I walked down the aisle, something made me pause. For just a moment, I could have sworn his head turned slightly, tracking my movement, but that was impossible. Adrian Kane was blind. Everyone knew the tragic story of how he had lost his sight. The ceremony passed in a haze of traditional vows and hollow promises. When Adrian slipped the ring onto my finger, his touch was sure and precise, finding my hand without any guidance. I told myself it was practice, that he had probably rehearsed this moment countless times. The reception was a grand affair at the Kane Mansion, my new home. I watched Adrian navigate the crowd with surprising ease, accepting congratulations and making small talk as if he could see every guest perfectly. Margaret hovered nearby, but she rarely needed to assist him. "Your husband manages remarkably well," an elderly guest commented to me. One would hardly know about his condition. I smiled tightly, but the observation lodged in my mind like a splinter. There were other small things I had noticed throughout the day. The way he seemed to avoid obstacles before his cane could detect them. How he turned toward people before they spoke. The precise way he had cut his wedding cake. That night, alone in our new bedroom, I watched Adrian move around the space with familiar ease. He had insisted we have separate rooms, claiming it would be easier for both of us as we adjusted to married life. I had been relieved at the time, but now I wondered if there was another reason. As I lay in my bed, unable to sleep, I made a decision. I would test my suspicions. If Adrian Kane was lying about being blind, I would find out why. And then I would make him regret ever choosing me as his bride. My new life as Mrs. Adrian Kane had begun, but it would not go according to anyone's plans but my own. I was trapped in this marriage for now, but I would uncover every secret my mysterious husband was hiding. Starting tomorrow, the real game would begin. I closed my eyes, my mind already forming plans. The brush strokes of my earlier painting flashed behind my eyelids, but now they felt less like an expression of anger and more like a prophecy, dark and twisted, just like this marriage. Just like the man sleeping down the hall, who might be seeing far more than he claimed. The morning after my wedding dawned with a pristine clarity that felt like mockery. I lay in my new bed, surrounded by luxurious sheets that cost more than my monthly rent at my old apartment, and stared at the coffered ceiling of my prison. The Kane Mansion was silent except for the distant sounds of staff preparing for the day. I waited until I heard Adrian's door open and close, followed by his measured footsteps passing my room. Every morning since our wedding, he followed the same routine, walking from his bedroom to his study with perfect precision. Too perfect. Once I was sure he was gone, I slipped out of bed and began my own morning ritual, one I had carefully crafted over the past week. I deliberately moved a small table in the hallway 3 inches to the left. Nothing dramatic, just enough to be a potential hazard for someone who was truly blind. The mansion was a maze of antiques and priceless artifacts, each one positioned with mathematical precision. Margaret, Adrian's ever-present assistant, had given me a thorough tour on my first day, explaining where everything belonged. She had emphasized the importance of maintaining order for Adrian's sake, her eyes sharp with warning. I made my way to the dining room, where breakfast was already laid out. Adrian sat at the head of the table, reading today's newspaper. Reading. The paper wasn't Braille, and he wasn't using any assistive devices. When he heard me enter, he quickly folded the paper and set it aside. "Good morning, Maya," he greeted, his unseeing eyes directed perfectly at my face. "Good morning," I replied, studying him as I took my seat. His hand found his coffee cup without hesitation, lifting it to his lips in one smooth motion. The cup had been several inches from where the staff usually placed it. Our breakfast routine had become a carefully choreographed performance. Adrian would make polite conversation while I watched for any slip in his blind man's act. The staff moved around us like silent shadows, but I could sense their unease. "I thought we might discuss redecorating your studio space today," Adrian said, cutting into his eggs with surgical precision. Margaret can show you the available rooms, and you can choose whichever suits your needs best. The mention of my art sent a pang through my chest. I hadn't touched a brush since our wedding day. That would be nice, I lied, watching as he reached for the salt shaker without missing a beat. After breakfast, I retreated to my room to change. Through my window, I could see Adrian in the garden, walking with Margaret. His cane swept the path before him, but I noticed how he stepped over roots and uneven stones before the cane could detect them. The sound of my door opening made me jump. One of the maids, Emma, entered with fresh towels. She was young, probably just a few years younger than me, and the only staff member who seemed genuinely friendly. "Mrs. Kane, I brought you fresh towels," she said, then paused, noticing my intense observation of the garden. "The master knows every inch of these grounds by heart. It's remarkable how he's adapted." "Yes, remarkable," I murmured. "Emma, how long have you worked here?" "Almost 6 years, ma'am. Since before Mr. Kane's accident." My interest sharpened. "You knew him before he lost his sight?" Emma's face flickered with something I couldn't quite read. "I should return to my duties, ma'am." She hurried from the room, leaving me with more questions than answers. That afternoon, Margaret showed me the potential studio spaces. Each room was perfect in its own way, with optimal lighting and views of the garden. As she droned on about ventilation and storage, I found myself distracted by a portrait hanging in the hallway. It showed Adrian, painted perhaps 5 or 6 years ago. His eyes, the same striking blue I saw every day, stared out from the canvas with an intensity that made me shiver. There was something familiar about that gaze, something that tugged at my memory, but I couldn't place it. "That was painted just before the accident," Margaret said, following my gaze. "The family commissioned it for his 30th birthday." I stepped closer to the portrait, studying the face of the man I had married. In the painting, his expression held a hint of something I'd never seen in person, vulnerability perhaps, or longing. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of room tours and logistical discussions. I finally selected a space in the east wing, as far from Adrian's study as possible. Margaret seemed pleased with my choice, which immediately made me suspicious. That evening, I decided to escalate my tests. During dinner, I deliberately knocked over my water glass. Adrian's hand shot out to steady it before it could spill, his reflexes too quick for someone who shouldn't have seen it falling. "Good catch," I said, watching his face carefully. A muscle twitched in his jaw. I've developed quite sensitive hearing since the accident. The sound of the glass moving made me react instinctively. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation, but I didn't believe it for a second. Later that night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the house settling. My mind raced with questions. If Adrian could see, why maintain this elaborate deception? What could he possibly gain by pretending to be blind? And why choose me for this charade of a marriage? The memory of his portrait nagged at me. There was something about those eyes, something I should remember. But every time I got close to the memory, it slipped away like smoke. I got out of bed and padded to my door, opening it silently. The hallway was dark, but a faint light spilled from beneath Adrian's study door. I crept closer, my bare feet silent on the thick carpet. Through the gap under the door, I could see shadows moving. Adrian's shadow, to be precise, moving with the confident stride of a man who could see perfectly well. I pressed my ear to the door and heard the unmistakable sound of pages turning. My heart pounding, I reached for the handle, but before I could turn it, footsteps approached from the other direction. I quickly retreated to my room, closing the door just as Margaret's distinctive gait passed by. In the safety of my room, I pressed my back against the door and tried to slow my breathing. I was right. Adrian Kane could see. Now I just had to prove it, and more importantly, figure out why he was going to such lengths to hide it. As I climbed back into bed, a new thought occurred to me. If Adrian had been faking his blindness all this time, what else was he lying about? Who was the man I had married? Sleep eluded me as I stared at the ceiling, my mind spinning with possibilities. Tomorrow I would begin documenting everything. Every inconsistency, every too perfect movement, every slip in his carefully maintained facade. I would build my case piece by piece until I had enough evidence to confront him. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. If Adrian was capable of maintaining such an elaborate deception, what else was he capable of? And what would he do when he realized I was onto him? 2 weeks into my marriage, I had developed a system for testing Adrian's supposed blindness. Each morning, I would make subtle changes to our environment. A chair moved slightly out of place, a new object on a table, a rug corner turned up. Small things that someone with sight would naturally avoid, but that should trip up a blind person. Today's test involved a delicate vase placed slightly off-center on the hallway table. I positioned myself at the perfect angle, pretending to read a book while watching Adrian's approach through the reflection in a nearby mirror. He walked with his usual confidence, cane sweeping before him in what I now recognized as purely theatrical movements. As he neared the vase, his body shifted ever so slightly, avoiding it with millimeter precision. The movement was so subtle that if I hadn't been watching for it specifically, I would have missed it entirely. My hands tightened on my book. Another piece of evidence for my growing collection. I had started keeping a detailed journal of every suspicious incident, hidden in my new studio where I knew Adrian wouldn't look. The irony of hiding something from a blind man who could see was not lost on me. But it was getting harder to maintain my composure around him. Every shared meal, every polite conversation was laced with tension. I found myself studying his face constantly, searching for cracks in his performance. And sometimes, when I thought he wasn't aware, I caught him doing the same to me. That evening, I decided to push things further. I went to my studio, supposedly to paint, but really to set up my riskiest test yet. I changed into my favorite silk robe, leaving it deliberately loose. Then I positioned myself by the large windows, allowing the setting sun to silhouette my body through the thin fabric. I heard Adrian's footsteps in the hallway, right on schedule for his evening walk. When he passed the studio door, I called out to him, "Adrian, could you help me with something?" He paused, then entered the room with perfect navigation around my carefully arranged furniture. "What do you need?" I turned toward him, knowing the sunlight would make my robe nearly transparent. "I can't reach the top shelf. Would you mind?" For a split second, his eyes widened, drinking in the view before him. Then his composure snapped back into place, but it was too late. I had seen the hunger in his gaze, the undeniable proof that he could see every inch of me. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. The blue paint on the top shelf. He reached up, his movements mechanical now, too controlled. His fingers found the paint on the first try, another slip in his performance. A blind man would have needed to feel along the shelf, identifying items by touch. "Thank you," I said softly, stepping closer to take the paint. Our fingers brushed, and I felt him tense. This close, I could see the muscle working in his jaw, the slight dilation of his pupils as they fixed on my face. "Is there anything else you need?" His voice was rough, strained. I let my robe slip slightly off one shoulder. "No." He left quickly, almost too quickly for someone who was supposed to be navigating by memory and touch alone. I waited until his footsteps faded before allowing myself a small smile of triumph. Finally, undeniable proof. But my victory was short-lived. Later that night, as I was preparing for bed, I caught my reflection in my vanity mirror and froze. Behind me, through the slightly open door, I saw Adrian standing in the hallway. His eyes, his supposedly blind eyes, were fixed directly on me, watching with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I spun around, but he was already gone, his footsteps retreating down the hall. My hands shook as I closed and locked my bedroom door. The hunter had become the hunted, and I suddenly wasn't sure which of us was which. Sleep eluded me that night as I replayed every interaction we'd had since our wedding. Each conversation, each seemingly innocent moment, took on new meaning. How long had he been watching me? What was the purpose of this elaborate deception? The next morning, I woke early and went to my studio, needing to think. As I sorted through my art supplies, something caught my eye. A sketchbook I didn't recognize was tucked between my canvases. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The pages were filled with drawings of me painting, me reading, me walking in the garden. Some were dated from weeks ago, but others were older, much older. My blood ran cold as I recognized scenes from my college days. Years ago.
From art shows.
The last page was the most shocking. It was a detailed sketch of me from yesterday, in my silk robe by the window. Every detail was perfect, down to the way the sunlight had played across my skin. In the corner, today's date was written in Adrian's distinctive hand. I slammed the sketchbook shut, my mind reeling. This wasn't just about a man pretending to be blind. This was something much deeper, much more disturbing. Adrian hadn't just been watching me since our marriage. He'd been watching me for years. The sound of footsteps approaching sent me into a panic. I quickly shoved the sketchbook back where I'd found it and grabbed a random brush, trying to look busy. Adrian appeared in the doorway, his usual polite mask in place. "Good morning, Maya." "You're up early." I forced myself to sound normal. "I wanted to get some painting done before breakfast." He nodded, then did something he'd never done before. He walked into my studio, moving directly to the easel where I'd been working yesterday. His fingers traced the edge of the canvas with familiar ease. "Your technique has improved since college," he said quietly. "You always had talent, but now there's more confidence in your brush strokes." My brush clattered to the floor. He knew. He knew that I knew. The pretense was crumbling between us, but still neither of us spoke the truth aloud. "I should go get ready for breakfast," I managed to say, edging toward the door. "Maya." His voice stopped me. When I looked back, his eyes were fixed on me, seeing everything. "Be careful where you look for answers. Some things are better left in the dark." It wasn't just a suggestion. It was a warning. I fled to my room, my heart pounding. The game had changed. I wasn't just trying to expose a deception anymore, I was uncovering something much bigger. Something that had started long before our arranged marriage. As I dressed for breakfast, I caught sight of myself in the mirror again. This time I studied my reflection carefully, trying to see what Adrian saw, what he had apparently been seeing for years. Who was this man who had orchestrated my presence in his life so carefully? And more importantly, what did he want from me? The weight of the sketchbook's revelations pressed down on me. I needed to find out the truth, but Adrian's warning echoed in my mind. Some things are better left in the dark, but I had never been good at leaving things alone, and I wasn't about to start now. I straightened my spine and took a deep breath. It was time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. If Adrian wanted to watch me, let him watch. I would give him a performance he wouldn't forget. Armed with the unsettling knowledge from the sketchbook, I spent the morning searching through the house while Adrian was occupied with business calls. The mansion's library became my first target, its walls lined with leather-bound books and family photographs that chronicled the Kane dynasty. My fingers trembled as I pulled down old photo albums, scanning through pages of formal events and family gatherings. Then I found it, a worn yearbook from Brighton Prep, dated 15 years ago. My senior year. I flipped through the pages frantically until I reached my class photos. There I was, younger and more carefree, standing in front of an easel in the art room. But what made my breath catch was the figure in the background, partially blurred but unmistakable. Adrian Kane, watching me from across the room. More yearbooks revealed more photographs. Adrian appearing in the periphery of every major art show, every school event I had participated in. Always watching, always in the background. My stomach churned as I realized the depth of his obsession. A creaking floorboard made me whirl around. Margaret stood in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the yearbook in my hands. "Mrs. Kane, lunch will be served in 10 minutes. How long have you known?" I demanded, holding up the yearbook. "How long have you been helping him maintain this lie?" Margaret's face remained impassive. "I serve the Kane family loyally, Mrs. Kane. That includes protecting their privacy. Their privacy or their secrets." She straightened her spine. "Sometimes they are one and the same. I suggest you change for lunch, Mr. Kane prefers punctuality." After she left, I quickly photographed several pages with my phone before returning the yearbooks to their shelves. My mind raced with questions. Had my parents known about Adrian's past surveillance when they arranged this marriage? Was money involved, or something darker? At lunch, I studied Adrian across the table, seeing him with new eyes. The polished businessman veneer seemed thinner now, revealing glimpses of the obsessed teenager who had watched me from shadows. "You're quiet today," he observed, cutting into his steak with precise movements. "Just thinking about the past," I replied carefully. "Do you ever think about high school, Adrian?" His knife paused for a fraction of a second. "High school seems like another lifetime." Brighton Prep was quite memorable, I pressed. "Especially the art program." "I wouldn't know," he said smoothly. "I attended Westbrook Academy." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily that I almost doubted my own discovery. But the photographs didn't lie. Adrian Kane had been at Brighton Prep, watching me, documenting my life without my knowledge. After lunch, I retreated to my studio, needing space to think. The sketchbook still sat where I had found it, a testament to Adrian's years of observation. I opened it again, forcing myself to study each drawing carefully. The early sketches showed a rawness, an amateur's hand learning to capture his subject. But as the dates progressed, the skill improved dramatically. By the time he reached the recent drawings, every line was perfect, every detail exact. He had spent years practicing, perfecting his ability to capture me on paper. A new thought struck me. I pulled out my phone and searched for news articles about Adrian's accident. The official story claimed he had lost his sight in a car crash 5 years ago, but the drawings in the sketchbook continued well past that date. The accident report was surprisingly thin on details. No other vehicles involved, no witnesses listed. Just a single car crash on a deserted road, resulting in complete blindness for the heir to the Kane fortune. I dug deeper, searching medical records, insurance claims, anything that might prove or disprove his condition. But every document was perfectly in order, too perfect. Like the way he moved through the house, the way he anticipated every obstacle, the sound of my studio door opening made me quickly close the browser. Adrian stood there, his unseeing eyes fixed on my location with unnerving accuracy. "Finding everything you need for your art?" he asked, his voice gentle but carrying an undercurrent of something else. "Almost," I replied, watching him navigate the room. "There are still some mysteries to solve." He smiled, a small, knowing expression that sent chills down my spine. "Mysteries can be dangerous things, Maya. Sometimes the truth is worse than not knowing. Is that why you pretend to be blind?" The words escaped before I could stop them. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Adrian turned toward me fully, his blue eyes piercing through the pretense of blindness. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Dinner is at 7, he finally said, turning to leave. "Wear the blue dress I bought you. It matches your eyes." I sat frozen in my chair long after he left, his parting words ringing in my ears. The blue dress he bought me. The dress that had appeared in my closet last week, that I had never worn in his presence. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. That evening, I put on the blue dress, a silent acknowledgement of our growing game of cat and mouse. When I entered the dining room, Adrian's eyes followed my movement, appreciating how the silk hugged my curves. "Beautiful," he murmured, not bothering to maintain his blind man's facade. I took my seat, heart pounding. "Thank you. Though I'm curious how you chose it given your condition. I have excellent taste," he replied, a small smirk playing at his lips. "And an excellent memory for beauty. Like your memories of Brighton Prep?" The smirk vanished. "You've been busy today. Just exploring my new home?" I said innocently. "Finding out who I married." Adrian leaned forward, all pretense gone. "And what have you discovered, Maya?" "That you've been watching me for a very long time. That this marriage isn't what it seems. That everything about you is a carefully constructed lie." He sat back, considering me with those intense blue eyes that had never been blind. "Not everything is a lie, Maya. My feelings for you have always been real." "Your feelings?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean your obsession? The years of stalking me, drawing me, manipulating my life until I ended up here? I prefer to think of it as devotion," he said softly. "Everything I've done has been for you." The casual admission of his deception made my head spin. Why the charade? Why pretend to be blind? Adrian's face softened with an emotion I couldn't quite read, because it was the only way to keep you close while I showed you who I really am, who we could be together. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "You're insane." "No." His voice was calm, controlled. "I'm in love. I have been since the first time I saw you painting in the art room at Brighton Prep. Everything since then has been leading to this moment, to us." I backed away from the table, from him, from the madness of his confession. "There is no us. There never was." His voice followed me. "Running won't change anything, Maya. It never has." In my room, I locked the door and sank to the floor, my mind reeling. The truth was finally out, but it brought no relief. Only more questions, more fear, and a growing realization that I was trapped in something far more complex than an arranged marriage. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the yearbook photos I had captured earlier. Each one showed Adrian watching me, his obsession documented in faded photographs and perfect sketches. He had been planning this for years, manipulating events until I had no choice but to become his wife. But he had made one crucial mistake. In revealing the truth, he had given me power. Knowledge was power, and now I knew exactly what kind of man I had married. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the manicured grounds of my gilded prison. Somewhere in this mansion were answers to questions I hadn't even thought to ask yet. Tomorrow I would start looking for them. Adrian might have spent years watching me, but now I would be watching him. And this time, I wouldn't be the only one caught in the spotlight. Morning brought a new strategy. If Adrian wanted to play games, I would play along, but by my own rules. I dressed carefully in a silk blouse and pencil skirt, knowing his eyes would follow every movement. At breakfast, I ignored the tension crackling between us, chatting about innocuous topics while secretly watching his reactions. His mask of blindness had slipped, revealing subtle tells I had missed before. The way his eyes lingered on my lips when I spoke, how they darkened when I deliberately let my blouse fall open slightly. "I thought I might explore the East Wing today," I said casually, buttering my toast. "There must be so many interesting things stored away up there." Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The East Wing is being renovated. It would be safer to stay in the main house." "Safer for whom?" I challenged, meeting his gaze directly. A ghost of a smile played at his lips. "We both know I only want to protect you, Maya." "Like you protected me in high school? Following me, drawing me, planning all of this?" "I watched over you," he corrected. "There's a difference." I leaned forward, dropping my voice. "And what about now? Do you still watch over me when I sleep? When I shower? When I change clothes?" His pupils dilated, but his voice remained steady. "I see everything I need to see." The admission sent shivers down my spine, but I pressed on. "Then see this. I'm not your possession, Adrian. I never was." "No." His smile grew wider. "You're my wife." I stood up abruptly, needing to escape his intensity. But as I turned to leave, his hand shot out and caught my wrist. His touch was gentle but firm, a reminder of the power he held. "The East Wing is off limits," he said softly. "Don't make me enforce that rule." I yanked my hand away and stormed out, my heart pounding. In my studio, I paced frantically, trying to think. What was he hiding in the East Wing? What secrets lay behind those locked doors? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Opening it revealed a single photo, clearly taken moments ago, of me pacing in my studio. The message below read, "I told you I see everything." Anger replaced fear. Two could play at this game. I grabbed my sketchbook and began to draw, quick angry strokes capturing Adrian's true nature. The obsession in his eyes, the predatory grace of his movements, the lies written in every line of his face. Hours passed as I worked, pouring my fury onto paper. When I finally looked up, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across my studio floor. And there, in the doorway, stood Adrian. "You've captured me perfectly," he said, moving closer to examine the drawing. "Though I think you've made me look a bit more sinister than I am." "Have I?" I challenged. "You've been stalking me for over a decade, manipulated my family into this marriage, and now keep me prisoner in your mansion while pretending to be blind." "I'd say sinister is an understatement." He reached out, his fingers trailing along the edge of the sketch. "You still don't understand, do you? Everything I've done has been for us. There is no us," I spat. "There's just your twisted fantasy and my trapped reality." Adrian moved closer, backing me against my easel. "Is it really so twisted to love someone completely? To watch them grow? To protect them? To ensure their happiness?" "This isn't love," I whispered. "This is obsession." His hand came up to cup my cheek, and despite myself, I shivered at his touch. Sometimes they're the same thing. I jerked away from him. "Stay away from me." "Impossible," he murmured. "We're bound together now, Maya. The sooner you accept that, the happier you'll be." That night I lay awake in my bed, my mind racing. The photo he had sent proved he had cameras throughout the house. His warning about the East Wing suggested he was hiding something important there. And his touch, that gentle, possessive touch, still burned on my skin. I pulled out my phone and began researching security systems, camera setups, anything that might help me understand the extent of his surveillance. But every search led me down another rabbit hole of questions. A soft knock at my door made me jump. "Maya?" Adrian's voice called out. "I know you're awake." I remained silent, holding my breath. "I can hear your phone clicking," he continued. "And see its light under your door. We need to talk." Slowly, I got up and opened the door. Adrian stood there in his pajamas, looking deceptively normal. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had watched me for so long, held something dark and hungry. "What do you want?" I asked. "To show you something," he replied. "Get dressed." Against my better judgment, I followed him through the dark house. We climbed stairs I had never noticed before, winding our way up to what I realized must be the forbidden East Wing. Adrian unlocked a heavy door and stepped aside. "After you." Inside was a room unlike anything I had imagined. The walls were covered with photographs, sketches, and paintings, all of me. My life documented in obsessive detail, from high school through to yesterday. Art show programs, newspaper clippings, candid photos taken without my knowledge, all carefully preserved and displayed. "My gallery," Adrian said proudly. "Every moment I've shared with you, even when you didn't know I was there." I stared in horror at this shrine to his obsession. "You're insane." "I'm dedicated," he corrected. "To you, to us, to the life we're building together." I backed away from him, from the evidence of his madness. "I want a divorce." Adrian's face darkened. "That's not possible. You can't keep me here forever." "I can," he said simply. "And I will. Until you understand that everything I've done has been out of love." I fled the room, running blindly through the dark house until I reached my bedroom. Locking the door, I slid to the floor, my whole body shaking. The magnitude of my situation crashed over me. Adrian's obsession went beyond anything I had imagined. He had been orchestrating my life for years, positioning himself to claim me. And now that he had me, he would never let me go. My phone buzzed again. Another photo, this time of me huddled against my door. The message read, "Sweet dreams, my love." I turned off my phone and crawled into bed, pulling the covers over my head like a child hiding from monsters. But this monster had already caught me, had been watching me my whole life, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Tomorrow, I would begin planning my escape. But for now, I lay in the dark, feeling Adrian's eyes on me through his cameras, wondering how I had never noticed the predator lurking in the shadows of my life. In the distance, I heard his footsteps retreating to his room, and for the first time, I understood the true meaning of fear. Not the sharp panic of immediate danger, but the slow, creeping dread of knowing you're trapped in a cage built with patience and obsession by someone who knows your every move before you make it. The moon cast shadows through my window, and in them, I imagined I could see the threads of Adrian's web, spun over years of watching and waiting, now drawn tight around me. My prison was more than this mansion, more than this marriage. It was the culmination of a decade of careful planning by a man who had made an art form of his obsession. And somewhere in the darkness, behind his cameras and locked doors, that man was watching me still. I spent 3 days planning my escape, meticulously noting the security guards' rotations and identifying blind spots in Adrian's surveillance network. The East Wing's revelation had only strengthened my resolve to leave. I couldn't stay married to a man whose love manifested as obsessive control. My opportunity came during a charity gala Adrian was hosting. With the mansion full of guests, the security system would be partially disabled, and the staff would be too busy to monitor my movements. I packed a small bag with essentials and cash I had slowly accumulated, hiding it in my studio behind canvases. The night of the gala, I dressed carefully in a red evening gown Adrian had chosen. His eyes followed me as I descended the main staircase, hunger and possession clear in his gaze. "You look stunning," he murmured, taking my arm. "Everyone will envy me tonight." "Isn't that the point?" I replied coolly. "To show off your prize?" His fingers tightened on my arm. "You're more than a prize, Maya. You're my destiny." The ballroom filled with Silicon Valley's elite, all eager to curry favor with the Kane family, smiling and charming our guests while watching the clock. At midnight, the security shift would change, creating a brief window of opportunity. At 11:30, I excused myself to powder my nose. Instead of heading to the bathroom, I slipped up to my studio, heart pounding. The bag was where I had left it. I changed quickly into dark clothes and flat shoes. I was halfway down the service stairs when Adrian's voice froze me in place. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" He stood at the bottom of the stairs, his expression unreadable. The pretense of blindness was gone, his blue eyes sharp with anger and something else, something that made my blood run cold. "Let me go," I pleaded. "This isn't love, Adrian. This is imprisonment. I've given you everything," he said, climbing the stairs toward me. "Protected you, cherished you, made you my wife. And this is how you repay me?" I backed up, but he kept advancing. "Protected me? You've been stalking me since high school." "I've been watching over you," he corrected. "Making sure you were safe, happy, successful. Everything you are today is because of me." "That's not true." "No? Who do you think funded your first art show? Arranged for your work to be featured in galleries? Made sure you had every opportunity to pursue your dreams?" My mind reeled. Those were my achievements. "Of course they were," he said softly. "I just removed the obstacles. Like I'm removing this obstacle now." He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing my arm. I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. "Let me go!" "Never," he growled. "You're mine, Maya. You've always been mine." In desperation, I swung my bag at his head. He dodged, but his grip loosened enough for me to break free. I ran blindly up the stairs, hearing his footsteps behind me. The east wing door was unlocked. I darted inside, slamming it behind me. In the darkness, the photos and sketches of me seemed to watch with the same possessive intensity as their creator. "Maya." Adrian's voice came through the door. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked around frantically for another exit. The windows were too high, the ventilation ducts too small. I was trapped. The door opened slowly. Adrian stood there, his perfect composure cracked, revealing the obsession beneath. "Why are you fighting this?" he asked. "Everything I've done has been for you, for us." "There is no us," I spat. "There's just your sick fantasy." He moved into the room, forcing me to back away. "A fantasy? Look around you, Maya. Look at the evidence of my devotion. Every moment of your life, I've been there, protecting you, guiding you, controlling me. Loving you," he corrected. "From the first moment I saw you in that art room, paint on your cheeks, lost in your own world. I knew then that we were meant to be together." My back hit the wall. Adrian kept advancing until he was inches away, his body caging me in. "I won't let you leave," he said softly. "I can't. You're everything to me. Adrian, please," I whispered. "If you really love me, let me go." Something flickered in his eyes. For a moment, I thought I saw uncertainty, regret. Then his expression hardened. "I can't do that." His hand came up to cup my face. "You'll understand eventually. We belong together. Like hell we do." I brought my knee up sharply between his legs. As he doubled over in pain, I shoved past him and ran. Down the stairs, through the crowded ballroom, past startled guests and concerned staff. The cool night air hit my face as I burst through the front doors. Freedom was just beyond the gates. I ran faster, my lungs burning. Suddenly, headlights blinded me. A car screeched to a halt inches from where I stood. Margaret stepped out, her face grim. "Mrs. Kane," she said. "Mr. Kane requests your immediate return to the house." Security guards emerged from the shadows surrounding me. I looked back at the mansion, seeing Adrian standing in the doorway watching. Always watching. "Please." I tried one last time. "Help me." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "We all serve Mr. Kane, Mrs. Kane. It's better if you accept that." They escorted me back inside, past the curious stares of the remaining guests. Adrian met us in the foyer, his composure restored. "The party's over," he announced loudly. "My wife isn't feeling well." As the guests filed out, he turned to me. The tenderness in his expression was somehow worse than anger would have been. "We need to talk," he said softly. "About trust, about love, about our future together." I let him lead me to his study, too exhausted to fight anymore. The reality of my situation crashed over me. Every exit was watched, every escape route blocked. Adrian had spent years building this cage, and now I was truly trapped inside it. "I do love you," he said, once we were alone. "Everything I've done has been because I love you so much it consumes me." I looked at him. This man who had orchestrated my entire life, who had turned love into an obsession, devotion into possession. "I know," I whispered. "That's what terrifies me." He smiled, reaching for my hand. This time I didn't pull away. What was the point? He would only grab harder, hold tighter, watch closer. "You'll learn to love me," he promised. "We have all the time in the world." Outside, the last guests were leaving, their cars disappearing into the night. But I remained in Adrian's study, held captive by his gentle touch and burning gaze, knowing that every moment of my life would continue to be documented, controlled, possessed by this man who called his obsession love. And somewhere in the East Wing, my life story waited in photographs and sketches, a testament to a devotion that had turned toxic, a love that had become a prison. Adrian had won this round, but as I sat there under his watchful eyes, I began to plan again. He might see everything, but even the most vigilant observer could miss what was right in front of them. I would bide my time, play my role, and wait for my next chance. Because if Adrian had taught me anything, it was the power of patience. The days following my failed escape attempt settled into a tense routine. Adrian watched me more openly now, abandoning all pretense of blindness. His constant surveillance became bolder, more possessive, as if my attempt to leave had only strengthened his resolve to keep me. During breakfast, I found his old journal lying conspicuously on my plate. A power play, clearly, but my hand still trembled as I opened it. The first entry was dated 15 years ago, written in a younger Adrian's hand. "I saw her again today in the art room. She never notices me watching, too absorbed in her painting. The way her face lights up when she creates something beautiful takes my breath away. Someday she'll look at me that way." I flipped through more pages, each entry more obsessive than the last. He had documented everything: my class schedule, my favorite foods, the names of my friends, even the brand of shampoo I used. "Enlightening reading?" Adrian asked, sipping his coffee. I closed the journal carefully. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to understand." He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "My love for you wasn't sudden or convenient. It's been growing for 15 years, deepening with every moment I watched you become the woman you are today." "You mean the woman you shaped me into?" His smile was gentle but triumphant. "I merely guided you toward your best path. Every choice was still yours." "Like choosing to marry you?" "We both know that was inevitable." I stood up abruptly, needing to escape his suffocating presence. But as I reached the door, his voice stopped me. "There's more in my study. If you want to understand, truly understand, you should read them all." The invitation was a trap, but curiosity pulled me toward his study anyway. The room was lined with journals, each one meticulously dated and arranged. 15 years of obsession documented in precise handwriting. I spent hours reading, watching myself through Adrian's eyes. He had recorded everything: my first art show victory, my college acceptance, my first serious boyfriend. That relationship had ended suddenly when my boyfriend unexpectedly moved across the country for a job opportunity. Now I wondered if Adrian had orchestrated that too. A particular entry caught my eye, dated 5 years ago. "The accident is arranged. Everyone will believe I'm blind, and Maya's parents will accept the marriage proposal. They're already in significant debt to my family, though they don't know it yet. Everything is falling into place." My hands shook as I read the detailed description of how he had faked his blindness, practicing for months to make his performance convincing. He had planned everything, manipulated everyone, all to ensure I would become his wife. Finding answers? I whirled around to find Adrian watching from the doorway. He moved into the study with predatory grace, picking up one of the journals. "I've loved you for so long," he said softly. "Watching you grow, protecting you from afar. Do you know how many times I've saved you from making terrible mistakes?" "You mean how many times you've manipulated my life?" He ignored my bitter tone. "Remember Thomas Bennett in college? The art professor who wanted to mentor you privately? I discovered his history of inappropriate relationships with students before he could hurt you. My mind raced, remembering how Professor Bennett had suddenly resigned mid-semester. "What did you do to him?" "I protected you," Adrian said simply. "Like I always have." By destroying people's lives? By removing threats to your happiness. He stepped closer. Everything I've done has been for you. I jerked away from his touch. You're insane. I'm devoted, he corrected. There's a difference. No, there isn't. I gestured to the wall of journals. This isn't devotion, Adrian. This is sick. His expression darkened. You still don't understand, but you will. He moved to his desk and pulled out another journal, this one newer. I've documented every moment since our marriage, too. Every beautiful smile, every defiant glare, every failed escape attempt. Someday, we'll read these together and laugh about how long it took you to accept our love. The casualness with which he discussed his obsession chilled me. In his mind, this was normal. Romance, even. He truly believed that his years of stalking and manipulation were acts of love. I'll never love you, I whispered. His smile was patient, indulgent. You already do. You just don't realize it yet. I fled his study, but his words followed me. In my room, I pulled out my phone and began researching obsessive behavior, stalking patterns, anything that might help me understand the man who had claimed ownership of my life. The results were terrifying. Adrian's behavior matched every warning sign, every red flag, but he had hidden it so well, wrapped his obsession in wealth and privilege and careful planning. By the time anyone realized the truth, it would be too late, was already too late. A text message popped up on my screen. You look beautiful when you're worried. I looked up at the camera in the corner of my room, knowing Adrian was watching. He was always watching. Another message. Come to dinner. We have more to discuss. In the dining room, Adrian had arranged an intimate dinner for two. Candles, wine, soft music playing in the background. A perfect romantic setting that made my skin crawl. I thought we could celebrate, he said, pulling out my chair. Celebrate what? The beginning of your understanding. He poured wine into my glass. Now that you've read the journals, you know the depth of my commitment to you. You mean the depth of your obsession? Love. Obsession. He shrugged elegantly. They're closer than most people think. Both require dedication, sacrifice, unwavering focus on the beloved. Normal love doesn't involve stalking and manipulation. His eyes glittered in the candlelight. Normal love is weak, conditional. What I feel for you transcends normal boundaries. It transcends sanity, I muttered. Adrian reached across the table and caught my hand. His touch was gentle but inescapable, like everything about him. I've watched you paint, he said softly. Seen how you lose yourself in creation, how you pour your whole being into your art. That's how I love you. Completely, consumingly, without reservation or limit. That's not love, I whispered. That's possession. Perhaps. His thumb stroked my palm. But you're mine now, Maya. Forever. I pulled my hand away and stood up. I'm going to bed. Of course. He smiled knowingly. Sleep well, my love. I'll be watching over you, as always. In my room, I sat on my bed and stared at the camera in the corner. Somewhere in this mansion, Adrian was watching me through it, adding another entry to his endless journals about my every move. My prison was more than physical walls and security systems. It was 15 years of careful observation and manipulation, all documented in precise handwriting. Every choice I thought I had made freely had been guided by Adrian's invisible hand. But as I got ready for bed, a new thought occurred to me. Adrian's greatest weakness was his obsession with me. He watched so carefully, documented so thoroughly, that he might miss what was right in front of him. I could use that. I smiled at the camera, knowing he would analyze that smile, write about it in his journal, try to decipher its meaning, let him watch, let him document, let him think he knew everything about me. Because Adrian Kane might have spent 15 years studying me, but he had revealed something crucial. He saw what he wanted to see, and I could work with that. In his study, Adrian noted my smile in his journal, adding it to his vast collection of observations. But for the first time in 15 years, he might have misread me. I waited 2 weeks before making my next move, letting Adrian grow comfortable with my apparent acceptance of our situation. I smiled at his cameras, tolerated his touch, listened to his endless monologues about our destined love, all while secretly searching for the truth about his family's connection to mine. The revelation came hidden in an old filing cabinet in his study, buried under years of business documents. My father's company's original ownership papers showing that 15 years ago it had belonged entirely to him. Now, reviewing the current documents, I saw how the Kane family had gradually acquired controlling interest through a series of complex financial maneuvers. They had stripped my father of his life's work piece by piece, so slowly he hadn't noticed until it was too late. And then they had offered him a solution, a marriage between his daughter and the Kane heir. I confronted Adrian in his study, slamming the papers down on his desk. "You destroyed my father's company to force this marriage." He didn't even look surprised. "I secured our future together. Your father's company was failing anyway. I simply accelerated the process and provided a mutually beneficial solution." "Mutually beneficial?" "You blackmailed him into selling his daughter." Adrian stood, moving around his desk with that predatory grace I had come to dread. "I created circumstances that would bring us together. The company was just leverage. Did you ever actually love me, or was I just another acquisition?" His hand shot out, gripping my arm. "Everything I've done has been for love. The company, the marriage, all of it. I would burn down the world to keep you." The frightening part was that I believed him. His love was real, but it was a destructive force that consumed everything in its path. "Let me go," I whispered. "Never." His grip tightened. "You're mine, Maya. The sooner you accept that, the happier we'll both be. And if I never accept it?" His smile was gentle, but his eyes were hard. "Then we'll spend the rest of our lives in this dance. Me watching you running until you finally understand that there's no escape from destiny." I wrenched away from him and fled to my studio, my sanctuary. But even there, his cameras watched, his presence lingered. The walls seemed to close in as I realized the true depth of his manipulation. My phone buzzed with a text from him. "I know you're angry, but remember, everything I've done has been out of love." I threw my phone across the room, watching it shatter against the wall. Within minutes, Margaret appeared with a new one. "Mr. Kane insists you keep this on you at all times," she said, her face expressionless. "How long have you known?" I asked. "About the company. The manipulation, all of it?" She hesitated before answering. "I've served the Kane family for 20 years. I've watched Mr. Adrian's dedication to you grow from a schoolboy crush into something more intense." "You mean his obsession? Call it what you will." She placed the new phone on my desk. "But understand this, Mrs. Kane. He will never let you go. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be." After she left, I sat staring at the phone, my mind racing. Adrian had orchestrated everything, from my father's financial ruin to our marriage. He had watched me for 15 years, planning and manipulating until he had me exactly where he wanted me. But he had made one crucial mistake. In showing me the full scope of his obsession, he had revealed his own vulnerabilities. His need to document everything, to control every aspect of my life, had become a weakness I could exploit. I picked up the new phone and began typing. "I'm sorry for my outburst. Can we talk?" His response was immediate. "Dinner in my study. 7 p.m. I spent the next few hours preparing, not just mentally but physically. I chose a dress I knew he loved, styled my hair the way he preferred, made myself into the perfect vision of the wife he wanted me to be. When I entered his study that evening, his eyes devoured me. "You look beautiful. I dressed for you," I said softly, watching his pupils dilate with pleasure. Dinner was intimate, served on his desk between stacks of documents that detailed his years of manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I've been thinking," I said, sipping my wine, "about everything you've shown me, everything you've done." "And?" His voice was eager, hopeful. "Maybe you're right. Maybe all of this was destiny." His hand found mine across the desk. "I knew you would understand eventually." I forced myself to squeeze his hand, to meet his intense gaze. "Help me understand more. Show me everything." Adrian's face lit up with an almost boyish enthusiasm. He spent the next few hours showing me more documents, more evidence of his careful manipulation of my life. Each revelation was like a knife in my heart, but I smiled and nodded and played my part. By the time I returned to my room that night, I had a clearer picture of exactly what I was dealing with. Adrian hadn't just destroyed my father's company. He had systematically dismantled every potential obstacle to our marriage. In his own twisted way, He had been courting me for 15 years, removing rivals, creating opportunities, shaping my life to fit his vision. And now he had me exactly where he wanted me, under his constant surveillance, trapped in his web of love and obsession. But he had shown me too much, revealed too many of his secrets. He had given me the weapons I needed to fight back. I smiled at his camera as I prepared for bed, knowing he was watching. Let him think he had won. Let him believe his manipulation had finally worked, because Adrian Kane might have spent 15 years studying me, but he had missed something crucial. The girl he had fallen in love with, the artist who lost herself in creation, wasn't just passionate, she was clever, and she was done being a victim of his obsessive love. In his study, Adrian added another entry to his journal, documenting what he saw as my final acceptance of our destiny together. His words flowed across the page, describing my smile, my gentle touches, my apparent surrender to his love. But for once, the man who saw everything had missed what was right in front of him. The very obsession that had helped him capture me would now help me break free. I just had to be patient, play my role perfectly, and wait for the right moment. After all, Adrian had taught me well. Sometimes the greatest victories came from careful planning and infinite patience. Let him watch. Let him write. Let him think he knew every thought in my head and every feeling in my heart. He would learn, too late, that some things couldn't be captured in journals or seen through cameras. Some things, like the human heart, remained mysterious even under the most intense observation. And mine was preparing for war. My war against Adrian began with small acts of defiance disguised as submission. Each morning I greeted him with a kiss, letting him think I was warming to him while secretly marking the rhythms of the household. Security shift changes, staff rotations, the patterns of his own movements, all carefully noted in my mind. The breaking point came during a dinner party Adrian hosted for his business associates. I played the perfect wife, charming and attentive, while pieces of my plan fell into place. One of the guests, an elderly board member, mentioned my father's company. "Brilliant acquisition," he said, raising his glass to Adrian. Though I never understood why old Chen didn't fight harder to keep it. Adrian's hand tightened on my waist. "Some things are worth more than money." The implication made my blood boil, but I kept smiling. "Excuse me, I need to powder my nose." Instead of heading to the bathroom, I slipped into Adrian's study. His computer was locked, but I knew his password, had watched him type it countless times through the reflection in his window. Maya 1997, my name and birth year. The files I found confirmed everything. Emails detailing the systematic destruction of my father's company, the careful manipulation of loans and contracts, all designed to force him into a corner. The final email was from my father himself, agreeing to the marriage arrangement in exchange for keeping a small portion of his company. I quickly forwarded the evidence to a secure email account I had created. As I closed the computer, movement in the doorway made my heart stop. "Finding anything interesting?" Adrian asked, his voice dangerously soft. I turned to face him, abandoning pretense. "How could you do this to my father?" "I did what was necessary." He moved into the room, closing the door behind him. "Your father was weak, too proud to accept help when his company was failing. I simply created a situation that benefited everyone." "You destroyed his life's work." "I saved it," Adrian corrected. "And I got what I wanted most in the world, you." The coldness in his voice made me shiver. "You never loved me. You just wanted to own me." "Love, ownership." He shrugged elegantly. "For me, they're the same thing. You're sick. I'm devoted." He stepped closer, backing me against his desk. "And you're mine, Maya." "The emails won't change that." I froze. "How did you know about the emails?" His smile was predatory. "I see everything, remember? The account you created last week, the passwords you typed when you thought I wasn't watching. Even now, my security team is deleting that account and any trace of those emails." Rage and despair warred inside me. "I hate you." "No, you don't." His hand came up to cup my face, gentle despite the steel in his voice. "You're angry, confused, but deep down you know we belong together." I jerked away from his touch. "The only thing I know is that you're a monster. A monster who loves you more than life itself." He caught my wrist as I tried to leave. "Where are you going?" "To tell your guests the truth about who you really are." His grip tightened painfully. "No one would believe you." The wealthy eccentric who married his high school sweetheart, the touching story of our romance. It's all too perfect. You'll only embarrass yourself. He was right, and we both knew it. In the eyes of society, we were the perfect couple. Who would believe the truth? Now, Adrian said softly, you have two choices. You can go back to our guests and play your role as my loving wife, or I can have Margaret inform them that you're feeling unwell. Either way, this little rebellion ends now. The threat in his voice was clear. I straightened my spine, forced a smile onto my face. I'll go back to the party. Good girl. He kissed my forehead, a gesture of possession rather than affection. Remember, I'm watching. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and meaningless conversation. Each time I felt myself wavering, I caught Adrian's eye across the room, saw the warning there. When the last guest finally left, Adrian turned to me with that same predatory smile. You played your part beautifully. Go to hell. His expression hardened. I've been patient, Maya. Understanding. But if you continue to fight me, I'll have to take more drastic measures. What are you going to do? I challenged. Lock me in my room. You already monitor my every move. There are other ways to ensure compliance. He pulled out his phone, showed me a live feed of my parents' house. Your father still owns 15% of his company. It would be a shame if he lost that too. The threat hit me like a physical blow. You wouldn't. Try me. He tucked his phone away. Your happiness means everything to me, Maya. But I will do whatever it takes to keep you. I fled to my room, locking the door, though I knew it was pointless. Adrian's cameras watched as I curled up on my bed, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. My phone buzzed with a text from him. I love you. Sleep well. The words blurred through my tears. In trying to expose Adrian's manipulation, I had only given him more power over me. Now my parents' financial security hung in the balance, another weapon in his arsenal of control. But as I lay there, surrounded by the evidence of his obsession, a new resolve hardened in my heart. Adrian thought he had won, thought his threats had broken me completely. He was wrong. I might not be able to escape him physically, might not be able to expose his crimes to the world, but I could fight back in other ways. Small rebellions, tiny victories, anything to maintain my sense of self against his overwhelming possession. Adrian had taught me the power of patience, of careful observation and planning. Now I would use those lessons against him. Let him think he had crushed my spirit. Let him believe his threats had secured my obedience. Let him watch through his cameras and write in his journals about my apparent submission. I would bide my time, gather my strength, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. Because Adrian Kane might own my body, might control my movements, but he would never truly own my heart. That at least remained free. In his study, Adrian added another entry to his endless journals, documenting what he saw as my final defeat. But even the man who saw everything couldn't see inside my mind, couldn't read the determination growing stronger with each passing moment. The war wasn't over, it was just beginning. The storm broke on a Tuesday, both literally and figuratively. Rain lashed against the mansion windows as I stood in my studio, staring at my latest painting. It was dark, turbulent, reflecting the chaos in my heart. My path to this moment had been carefully orchestrated. For weeks, I had played the dutiful wife, letting Adrian believe his threats had broken me. I attended his business dinners, smiled for his cameras, even allowed his possessive touches without flinching. All while I waited for him to make a mistake. The painting before me was the key, a swirl of dark colors and hidden meanings that only I understood. At its center, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a familiar face, a young Adrian watching from the shadows of my high school art room. Beautiful work. His voice came from behind me, though darker than your usual style. I turned to face him, noting how his eyes lingered on the canvas. I was inspired by memories. Our memories? He moved closer, studying the painting. I see myself there, watching over you even then. You mean stalking me? Still so bitter. His hand reached for my face, but I stepped back. After everything I've given you, everything you've taken from me. His expression darkened. I've given you a life most women would envy. Wealth, security, a husband who worships you. A prison of luxury is still a prison. Is that what you think this is? He gestured around the studio. Look at this room, filled with everything an artist could want. Look at the life I've built for us. The life you forced on me, I corrected. Through manipulation and threats. Adrian's face softened with what he probably thought was patience. You still don't understand. Everything I've done has been for his devotion. He had given me the weapons I needed to fight back. I smiled at his camera as I prepared for bed, knowing he was watching. Let him think he had won. Let him believe his manipulation had finally worked, because Adrian Kane might have spent 15 years studying me, but he had missed something crucial. The girl he had fallen in love with, the artist who lost herself in creation, wasn't just passionate. She was clever, and she was done being a victim of his obsessive love. In his study, Adrian added another entry to his journal, documenting what he saw as my final acceptance of our destiny together. His words flowed across the page, describing my smile, my gentle touches, my apparent surrender to his love. But for once, the man who saw everything had missed what was right in front of him. The very obsession that had helped him capture me would now help me break free. I just had to be patient, play my role perfectly, and wait for the right moment. After all, Adrian had taught me well. Sometimes the greatest victories came from careful planning and infinite patience. Let him watch, let him write, let him think he knew every thought in my head and every feeling in my heart. He would learn too late that some things couldn't be captured in journals or seen through cameras. Some things, like the human heart, remained mysterious even under the most intense observation. And mine was preparing for war. My war against Adrian began with small acts of defiance disguised as submission. Each morning, I greeted him with a kiss, letting him think I was warming to him while secretly marking the rhythms of the household. Security shift changes, staff rotations, the patterns of his own movements, all carefully noted in my mind. The breaking point came during a dinner party Adrian hosted for his business associates. I played the perfect wife, charming and attentive, while pieces of my plan fell into place. One of the guests, an elderly board member, mentioned my father's company. "Brilliant acquisition," he said, raising his glass to Adrian. Though I never understood why old Chen didn't fight harder to keep it. Adrian's hand tightened on my waist. Some things are worth more than money. The implication made my blood boil, but I kept smiling. "Excuse me, I need to powder my nose." Instead of heading to the bathroom, I slipped into Adrian's study. His computer was locked, but I knew his password, had watched him type it countless times through the reflection in his window. Maya 1997, my name and birth year. The files I found confirmed everything. Emails detailing the systematic destruction of my father's company, the careful manipulation of loans and contracts, all designed to force him into a corner. The final email was from my father himself, agreeing to the marriage arrangement in exchange for keeping a small portion of his company. I quickly forwarded the evidence to a secure email account I had created. As I closed the computer, movement in the doorway made my heart stop. "Finding anything interesting?" Adrian asked, his voice dangerously soft. I turned to face him, abandoning pretense. "How could you do this to my father?" "I did what was necessary." He moved into the room, closing the door behind him. "Your father was weak, too proud to accept help when his company was failing. I simply created a situation that benefited everyone." "Benefited everyone?" "You destroyed his life's work." "I saved it," Adrian corrected, "and I got what I wanted most in the world, you." The coldness in his voice made me shiver. "You never loved me, you just wanted to own me." "Love, ownership." He shrugged elegantly. "For me, they're the same thing." "You're sick." "I'm devoted." He stepped closer, backing me against his desk. "And you're mine, Maya." "The emails won't change that." I froze. "How did you know about the emails?" His smile was predatory. "I see everything, remember? The account you created last week, the passwords you typed when you thought I wasn't watching. Even now, my security team is deleting that account and any trace of those emails." Rage and despair warred inside me. "I hate you." "No, you don't." His hand came up to cup my face, gentle despite the steel in his voice. "You're angry, confused, but deep down you know we belong together." I jerked away from his touch. "The only thing I know is that you're a monster who loves you more than life itself." He caught my wrist as I tried to leave. "Where are you going?" "To tell your guest the truth about who you really are." His grip tightened painfully. "No one would believe you." The wealthy eccentric who married his high school sweetheart, the touching story of our romance. It's all too perfect. You'll only embarrass yourself. He was right, and we both knew it. In the eyes of society, we were the perfect couple. Who would believe the truth? Now, Adrian said softly, you have two choices. You can go back to our guests and play your role as my loving wife, or I can have Margaret inform them that you're feeling unwell. Either way, this little rebellion ends now. The threat in his voice was clear. I straightened my spine, forced a smile onto my face. I'll go back to the party. Good girl. He kissed my forehead, a gesture of possession rather than affection. Remember, I'm watching. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and meaningless conversation. Each time I felt myself wavering, I caught Adrian's eye across the room, saw the warning there. When the last guest finally left, Adrian turned to me with that same predatory smile. You played your part beautifully. Go to hell. His expression hardened. I've been patient, Maya, understanding. But if you continue to fight me, I'll have to take more drastic measures. What are you going to do? I challenged. Lock me in my room? You already monitor my every move. There are other ways to ensure compliance. He pulled out his phone, showed me a live feed of my parents' house. Your father still owns 15% of his company. It would be a shame if he lost that too. The threat hit me like a physical blow. You wouldn't. Try me. He tucked his phone away. Your happiness means everything to me, Maya. But I will do whatever it takes to keep you. I fled to my room, locking the door, though I knew it was pointless. Adrian's cameras watched as I curled up on my bed, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. My phone buzzed with a text from him. I love you. Sleep well. The words blurred through my tears. In trying to expose Adrian's manipulation, I had only given him more power over me. Now my parents' financial security hung in the balance, another weapon in his arsenal of control. But as I lay there, surrounded by the evidence of his obsession, a new resolve hardened in my heart. Adrian thought he had won, thought his threats had broken me completely. He was wrong. I might not be able to escape him physically, might not be able to expose his crimes to the world, but I could fight back in other ways. Small rebellions, tiny victories, anything to maintain my sense of self against his overwhelming possession. Adrian had taught me the power of patience, of careful observation and planning. Now I would use those lessons against him. Let him think he had crushed my spirit. Let him believe his threats had secured my obedience. Let him watch through his cameras and write in his journals about my apparent submission. I would bide my time, gather my strength, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. Because Adrian Kane might own my body, might control my movements, but he would never truly own my heart. That at least remained free. In his study, Adrian added another entry to his endless journals, documenting what he saw as my final defeat. But even the man who saw everything couldn't see inside my mind, couldn't read the determination growing stronger with each passing moment. The war wasn't over, it was just beginning. The storm broke on a Tuesday, both literally and figuratively. Rain lashed against the mansion windows as I stood in my studio staring at my latest painting. It was dark, turbulent, reflecting the chaos in my heart. My path to this moment had been carefully orchestrated. For weeks, I had played the dutiful wife, letting Adrian believe his threats had broken me. I attended his business dinners, smiled for his cameras, even allowed his possessive touches without flinching. All while I waited for him to make a mistake. The painting before me was the key, a swirl of dark colors and hidden meanings that only I understood. At its center, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a familiar face, a young Adrian watching from the shadows of my high school art room. Beautiful work. His voice came from behind me. Though darker than your usual style. I turned to face him, noting how his eyes lingered on the canvas. I was inspired by memories. Our memories? He moved closer, studying the painting. I see myself there, watching over you even then. You mean stalking me? Still so bitter. His hand reached for my face, but I stepped back. After everything I've given you, everything you've taken from me. His expression darkened. I've given you a life most women would envy. Wealth, security, a husband who worships you. A prison of luxury is still a prison. Is that what you think this is? He gestured around the studio. Look at this room, filled with everything an artist could want. Look at the life I've built for us. The life you forced on me, I corrected, through manipulation and threats. Adrian's face softened with what he probably thought was patience. You still don't understand. Everything I've done has been for love. Carrying only a small bag and my art supplies, the rain had stopped. The air felt clean, renewed. Adrian watched from his study window, his tall figure silhouetted against the light. I didn't wave goodbye. Some stories don't need endings, just new beginnings. The taxi was waiting at the gates, ready to take me anywhere I wanted to go. As we drove away, I glanced back once at the mansion that had been my prison. In the window, Adrian still watched. He would always watch. I knew that now. But something had changed. Something had broken and reformed in that room of obsession. Perhaps he had finally learned the difference between love and possession. Or perhaps he had simply realized that some things were beyond even his control. Either way, I was free. Free to paint, to create, to live without his constant surveillance. Free to be the girl he had fallen in love with all those years ago. The girl who belonged to no one but herself. 1 year later, I stood in my new studio, surrounded by paintings that spoke of freedom rather than confinement. The morning light streamed through large windows, illuminating canvases filled with color and life. Adrian had kept his word. My father's company was fully restored to him, the paperwork handled quietly and efficiently. The divorce papers arrived a week after I left, signed without conditions or demands. Sometimes I caught glimpses of him in crowds, a tall figure watching from a distance. But he never approached, never tried to reclaim what he had released. Until today. The gallery opening was my first major show since leaving him. As I arranged the final pieces, my hands trembled slightly. The centerpiece was a large canvas depicting a man standing in a room of photographs, his back turned to the viewer as he faced his own obsession. Still painting me, I see. I turned to find Adrian in the doorway, looking both familiar and strange. The intensity was still there in his blue eyes, but it had softened somehow. You came, I said quietly. I received an invitation. He held up the cream-colored card I had sent after weeks of debating with myself. I wasn't sure you would accept. He moved into the gallery, studying each painting with the same careful attention he had once given to my every movement. These are different from your old work. Stronger. I'm different, I replied. Stronger. His gaze settled on the centerpiece, recognition flickering across his face. Is this how you see me now? It's how I remember us, both trapped in your obsession until we found our way out. Adrian turned to face me fully. Have we? Found our way out? I considered the question carefully. The year apart had given me perspective, allowed me to see our story with clearer eyes. You let me go, I said finally. That was the first step, the hardest thing I've ever done. His voice was soft but sincere. Watching you leave, knowing I had destroyed everything I claimed to love. Not destroyed, I corrected. Changed. We both changed. He moved closer, but stopped at a respectful distance. The old Adrian would have tried to possess the space between us. This one seemed content to let it exist. I've been in therapy, he said abruptly. Learning about obsession, control, the difference between love and possession. And what have you learned? That real love sets you free. He gestured to my paintings. Look at what your freedom has created. These are magnificent. The compliment warmed me because it felt genuine, not possessive. Thank you. We stood in comfortable silence, surrounded by art that told our story. The dark pieces that spoke of captivity, the brighter ones that celebrated release, and finally the centerpiece that captured the moment. Everything changed. I miss you, Adrian admitted quietly. Not the you I tried to possess, but the real you, the artist who made me see beauty in everything. I'm still that artist, I said. Maybe even more so now. He nodded, understanding. Because you're free. Yes. Adrian moved to the window, looking out at the city below. I keep your old studio exactly as you left it. Sometimes I stand there, remembering how you looked when you painted, lost in creation. Those memories belong to you, I said gently. Like these new paintings belong to me. He turned back to me, a small smile playing at his lips. You're teaching me new ways to love, even now. The observation surprised me, but I realized it was true. Every painting in this gallery was a lesson in letting go, in loving without possession. "Will you stay?" I asked. "For the opening? Do you want me to?" The question was heavy with meaning. A year ago, he would have assumed his presence was required, demanded. Now he asked, offering choice where once he had only given commands. "Yes," I decided. "Stay. See what freedom looks like on canvas." The gallery filled slowly with art lovers and critics. Adrian kept his distance, watching but not hovering, present but not possessive. As I explained my work to interested buyers, I caught glimpses of him studying each piece intently. His expression was thoughtful, almost reverent, as if seeing for the first time the beauty in letting go. The centerpiece sold first to a collector who spoke passionately about its emotional depth. As the piece was marked with a red dot, I saw Adrian smile. Genuinely smile, perhaps understanding finally that some things are more beautiful when released. Later, as the crowd thinned, he approached me one last time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the invitation, for these paintings, for teaching me what love really means." "Thank you," I replied. "For learning." He left quietly, without trying to possess the moment. Through the gallery windows, I watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the city streets. Turning back to my paintings, I felt peace settle over me. Our story hadn't ended in the storm of that night. It had transformed, like paint on canvas, into something unexpected and true. The final painting in the gallery showed two figures standing in rain, their forms distinct but not touching, with light breaking through storm clouds above them. Not a happy ending, but a beginning. A lesson in love and freedom, painted in colors only independence could create. In my new studio, surrounded by proof of my rebirth as an artist, I understood finally that some loves are meant to transform us. Adrian's obsession had nearly destroyed me, but its release had made me stronger, truer to myself. I picked up my brush, ready to paint whatever came next. The canvas before me was blank, waiting for new stories, new truths, new ways of seeing the world, just like me. The light through my studio windows painted patterns on the floor, reminding me of security camera footage, but now those patterns felt like decoration rather than surveillance, beauty rather than control. I was free, truly free, and in that freedom I had found my greatest masterpiece, a self-restored and renewed, ready to create without constraints, ready to love without possession.